Cuisinart presents Patently Easy Food Processor Cooking with your host, Greg Patton.
Hi, I'm Greg Patton, and welcome to my kitchen. On today's show, I'll be making versatile vegetable dishes with the food processor, including these zucchini boats stuffed with onion, green pepper, and bacon, a baked vegetable strata topped with fontina cheese and buttered breadcrumbs, and these egg rolls with 7 vegetables that you serve with a lime dipping sauce. Stuffed zucchini boats are a wonderful vegetable to make anytime. They are rich enough, substantial enough to serve as a main course, or you can serve them as a side dish to go along with grilled meats, chicken, or fish. You'll need 3 zucchini, each weighing about a ½ pound and about 8 inches long. What you need to do is cut each zucchini in half and then take a grapefruit spoon, and with this grapefruit spoon scoop out the pulp. The idea here, you see, is to make little boats that are about a 1/4 inch thick, and it's very important that you don't scoop too much zucchini out because you need these boats to actually support the filling so that the boats don't fall apart. Be sure you leave some zucchini at the ends and also make sure that the bottom is fairly thick. The shell itself should be about a 1/4 inch thick all around. Once you've carved the shells, then you blanch them by dropping them into boiling water. And here what I've done is drop these shells into boiling water, cook them for about 3 minutes, and then you plunge them into cold water. You can see they're fairly flexible, but they do hold their shape. You can drain them, cool them, pat them dry, and you can wrap them up and store them in the refrigerator for a couple of days ahead of time if you want. Now, for the recipe itself, have the metal blade of the food processor in place. Add 2 slices of bread that you've torn into pieces. If you want to weigh this on a scale, it'll turn out to be about 3 ounces. And then process for about 15 seconds. And this is how you can make your own homemade breadcrumbs. The bread is not toasted, it's just simply fresh bread cut into slices. And then you add 5 slices of bacon that you have cooked ahead of time. You cut it into strips about a 1/4 inch thick. Cook it until crisp, drain it, and then add it to the work bowl. And then process this for about another 10 seconds or so to chop the bacon with the bread. And then you just empty this from the work bowl and you set it aside until later, because this is going to be used in the stuffing, and it's a very, very delicious stuffing. Then we'll also put some Swiss cheese into the stuffing. So with a metal blade in place, start the motor and drop 3 ounces of Swiss cheese that you've cut into 1-inch pieces. You just drop it into the work bowl. And you want to process just for a few seconds, about 15 seconds or so, until the cheese is coarsely chopped. And then you just empty this out. There. And then we can set that aside until later. And that's also going to become part of the stuffing and also the topping. Then for the vegetable part itself, start the motor, drop a clove of garlic through the feed tube, and notice how it just bounces around. The easiest way to mince garlic, I know, and then when you hear no more chopping sounds, then you know that the garlic has been finely chopped. And then add 1 medium onion, weighs about 5 ounces, that you've cut in quarters. Add that to the work bowl. And also add 1 medium green pepper that you've seeded and cored and cut into 1-inch pieces. And then to chop these vegetables together, it's very important that you don't overprocess. So we'll turn the motor on and off 3 times. And scrape the work bowl and check the consistency of the vegetables. And one of the most common tasks you will do with a food processor is to chop onion and to chop green pepper. And these are watery vegetables, so you want to be sure you don't overprocess. So scrape the work bowl after 3 pulses, and then pulse 1 more time. And then, in this case, I can see that the vegetables are indeed just coarsely chopped. And so I'm going to go over here to a 10-inch skillet where I have 1 tablespoon of olive oil heating up. And I'll start these vegetables cooking. And then while these vegetables cook, let me go back to the processor and put in the medium shredding disc. And then take this zucchini pulp that I've saved. Now this is zucchini now from, it's the innards actually of the zucchini from the 3 zucchini boats. And then use a light pressure to process the zucchini. And I'd rather do this, fine shred the zucchini, than use the metal blade because I will get less water released. And you can see now that the zucchini is very nice, even pieces. And then you'll want to stir and cook this mixture for about 15 minutes. So stir it up really well and then add your seasonings. A ½ teaspoon of marjoram or oregano, a ½ teaspoon of salt, and again you can leave the salt out if you wish, and then also a grinding of black pepper. And then you can see here this mixture, these vegetables look very raw, and over here is a skillet where the vegetables have been cooked, and this has been cooking for 15 minutes. So once the vegetables have cooked for 15 minutes, they cook down, they reduce, and then they're ready to be stuffed into the zucchini. So I'm going to go over back to this area where we have the zucchini boats and complete making the filling. So you add the breadcrumb bacon mixture and also about 2/3 of the chopped cheese, and you stir this all together. And this filling really does hold together very well. It's so good that what you might want to do at some point is to just make this filling by itself, shape it into little patties, dip it into egg, and then quickly fry it in a little bit of oil for a delicious vegetable bacon kind of patty, so that the stuffing itself has a great deal of versatility. Once it's all mixed together, you arrange your zucchini boats on a baking sheet just large enough to hold them. This is a rectangular sheet. And then you take spoonfuls of this zucchini mixture and you just stuff it into the shells, mounting it high so that it looks nice and generous. Now you can do this way ahead of time. You can do this hours ahead of time and refrigerate it. And then when you're ready to bake, what you want to do is to adjust an oven rack to the upper 3rd position. Usually that's the topmost position in the oven. And preheat the oven to 425 degrees. And then to bake it, you just pop these zucchini boats into the oven after you have finished sprinkling it with the remaining Swiss cheese, as I'm about to do now. And you bake it just for about 10 to 15 minutes until it's nice and browned and the filling is hot. And then you serve them just as soon as you can. And it makes 6 zucchini boats that you should serve with a fresh tomato sauce. And everybody will love them. Baked vegetable strata is a layered combination of vegetables, lightly seasoned with herbs, and bound together with an egg and light cream mixture, topped with shredded fontina cheese and breadcrumbs. The whole thing is baked, can be prepared way ahead of time, and in fact, it's better if you bake it ahead and reheat it, so it's a perfect dish for party or for family. To begin, you have the metal blade in place. Add 2 slices of fresh bread that you've torn into pieces, and it can be white bread or whole wheat, and process for a few seconds to turn these bread cubes into crumbs. And then you add 2 tablespoons of melted butter, and then process for a few seconds more. And then we're going to set this topping aside because we're not going to really be ready for it until the strata has baked for a little bit. So we'll empty the work bowl and then put in the medium shredding disc, and we'll want to process 4 ounces of fontina cheese, and make sure that fontina is well chilled because it's a semi-soft cheese. It should be very well chilled and use almost no pressure. Now if you saw that the cheese fought back, what you should do at that point is just exert a little bit of firm pressure on it, and that way you're telling the cheese that it's supposed to go through the shredder and it'll do exactly what you say. Then you turn the cheese out, set it aside. In fact, we will not need this cheese or the breadcrumbs until much later, so I'm going to get these out of the way. And then I'm going to switch from the medium shredding disc over to the 3mm slicing disc, and we'll start processing the vegetables. I'm going to start with a green pepper, medium-sized green pepper. I've cored and seeded it but left it whole. And then we turn those into rings, and I want to show you what beautiful results you get. So here are the green pepper rings, and we'll get these all set aside. And we'll keep using the 3mm slicing disc to process all of the vegetables. Next, we'll do the onion. This is a medium-sized onion, and you can put it in vertically or horizontally. It doesn't really matter. And we'll get that set aside as well. See, the idea here with this baked vegetable strata is to prepare all of the vegetables ahead of time, and then you can just layer them in a leisurely fashion. Next, 2 medium-sized potatoes, and this could be boiling potatoes or baking potatoes. It doesn't matter. So there goes 1 and 2. And then we set these potatoes aside, and then we're going to switch over to a different disc to process some tomato. Let me get these potatoes out of the way. And then we're going to use the 6mm slicing disc. This is the thick slicer to process tomatoes. Whenever you slice tomatoes, first of all, select tomatoes that are ripe but still feel firm, and use very light pressure to process tomatoes because they're a soft fruit. So one right after the other goes into the work bowl. And then make sure that the tomatoes fit. And there we go. So now we have all of our vegetables. I'm going to take these tomato slices out. And the processor never made it so easy before to slice vegetables quickly and with just incredibly good results. So that's it for now. Then to layer this casserole, what you want to do is to butter an 8 or 9 inch square baking dish. Take half of your tomato slices and arrange them on the bottom of the dish. And we also have an herb mixture, a mixture of salt, pepper, a teaspoon of salt, a quarter teaspoon of pepper, a half teaspoon of oregano, and a half teaspoon of thyme leaves. And you want to take about a quarter teaspoon of that mixture and sprinkle it over the tomatoes. Then you take half of your onion mixture, or just the onions rather, your sliced onions, and sprinkle them with about a quarter teaspoon of your herb mixture. Then take half of your potatoes and layer them in. Make sure you don't overlap them too much or you won't have enough to make 2 layers. These vegetables have to be layered twice into the casserole. Take 1 tablespoon of melted butter and then just drizzle it over the potatoes. Sprinkle them with about a quarter teaspoon of the herb mixture, and then take half of your green pepper slices and layer them in, you see. And then another quarter teaspoon of the herb mixture. And then we add 1/3 cup of long grain rice. Just like that. And we just continue layering the vegetables, ending with the tomatoes, and adding butter after the onion and potato layers. So we'll use 4 tablespoons of melted butter in all. So I'm just going to continue with that right now. Here go the last of the tomatoes. Again, see how beautiful these slices are. And after these tomatoes go in, I'm going to sprinkle with the last of this herb, salt, and pepper mixture, and then pour on the very last of the melted butter, and then also pour on 1/4 cup of water. You see all these vegetables then are layered in this casserole. You want to cover this tightly with foil, and you want to bake this in the center of a preheated 350-degree oven for 90 minutes. This is why this is a good dish to do ahead. And I have one already here that has been baking for 90 minutes, so we'll bring that one out. Put this one in. And then now we can complete the strata. To make the custard mixture for the baked vegetable strata, use the metal blade to process 3/4 of a cup of light cream, or half and half, 1 large egg, and 1/8 of a teaspoon of freshly grated nutmeg. And if you're not familiar with freshly grated nutmeg, then you should buy yourself a whole nutmeg and one of these little graters. They're on sale for about $1. Much more aromatic and flavorful than pre-grated nutmeg. Process this for about 5 seconds. And then go over to your baked strata. You see it's nice and hot. And then secure the blade in place from below, and you pour this custard mixture all over the strata. Now the strata has already baked for 90 minutes at 350. We're going to put this back into the oven and let it bake for another 20 minutes. Then we take it out of the oven, sprinkle it with the fontina cheese that we prepared earlier, and then with these breadcrumbs. And then we put it back into the oven, let it bake for another 10 minutes at 350, and then the top should be a nice golden brown color. To serve, let it sit at room temperature for about 10 minutes or so, then cut it into squares and enjoy it either as a main course or as a side dish. The baked vegetable strata will serve from 6 to 8 people. Egg rolls with 7 vegetables make a great appetizer, side dish, or even main dish. They are so substantial you will not miss the meat. To make them, you start off by having 2 cups of cold cooked brown rice, and you add to that a tablespoon of hoisin sauce, a tablespoon of sherry, a tablespoon of soy sauce, and a tablespoon of brown sugar, and a little bit of black pepper, and you just stir this all together and then set it aside until later, and then we'll come back to it momentarily. With the metal blade of the food processor in place, start the motor and drop in 2 or 3 garlic cloves, depending upon how garlicky you like your food. Let it process for a few seconds until the garlic is finely minced. And then put in the medium shredder and have ready 2 large celery ribs that you've cut into 3-inch lengths. And then just lay these celery ribs horizontally in the feed tube and use medium pressure to process. Just like that. And then take the medium shredder out and put in the 2mm slicing disc. This is the thin slicing disc, and we're going to use this now to process a whole onion. So put the whole onion, this is a medium-sized onion, right in the feed tube, and use medium pressure. Very quick. Then take these vegetables and turn them into a 12-inch skillet in which you have heated up 2 tablespoons of oil, and let it cook for about 2 minutes, stirring occasionally just to start these vegetables cooking. And then while these vegetables are cooking, put the 2mm slicing disc back into the work bowl and have ready 1 pound of green cabbage that you cut into wedges to fit the feed tube, and then you stuff them in vertically and use medium pressure to process. And 1 pound of cabbage you will be able to process in just a very few seconds. And it certainly beats cutting this all by hand. So just cram the food into the feed tube, and there you go. Now, you take all of this cabbage and you dump it into the skillet. And you see you have a lot of vegetable at this point. You want to cook this over a medium-high heat for about 3 minutes, mixing everything together really well. And this will cook down to very little, and I want to show you what I mean right now. Cook this for just about 3 minutes, and then after it's done, turn it into a colander where it can drain. And you see here that huge amount of vegetable cooks down to about 3 cups of cooked cabbage, onions, and celery. And what you want to do now is to empty these vegetables into the bowl, a large mixing bowl, and add your cold-cooked brown rice mixture. And then go back to the processor and put back the shredding disc and take an 8-ounce piece of jicama. And this is peeled, so you want to have the peeled weight, and jicama is spelled J-I-C-A-M-A, If your markets don't carry it, ask them to. It's one of the most delicious vegetables imaginable. Crunchy and yet sweet tasting and low in calories. And then we'll just add these vegetables right to the work bowl, to the mixing bowl. And to complete the recipe, you add 1 cup of bean sprouts, about a tablespoon of oriental sesame oil, which is the dark sesame oil, and a ½ cup of cilantro leaves. And cilantro is Chinese parsley. Or if you can't get cilantro, then substitute watercress. And you want to mix all of this together. And when it's all thoroughly mixed together, and you can do this hours ahead of time, then we'll be ready to shape the egg rolls. Egg rolls are just plain fun to make. Take an egg roll wrapper that measures about 7 inches square, put it in front of you with a point towards you, and then take 1/3 of a cup of this egg roll mixture and shape it into a little compact cylinder about 3 to 4 inches long, right near the point closest to you. Then you take this point and you roll this cylinder up, giving it 1 turn. Take the ends like that and fold them over, tucking in any filling. And then to have everything sealed together properly, brush everything with 1 egg beaten with 2 tablespoons of water. And you should have enough filling to make about 14 to 15 egg rolls. And as they're shaped, right after they're shaped, brush the whole thing to make sure that all the edges are sealed with this egg wash. And then set them aside until all the egg rolls are shaped. Cook the egg rolls in about a ½ to 1 inch of oil heated to 375 degrees, and put about 6 or 7 egg rolls in a 12-inch skillet at the same time. You want to cook these until they're well browned all around. And while they're cooking, these can be really done ahead of time and put in a baking sheet and then reheated in an oven. But while they're cooking, let me show you how to make a lime dipping sauce to go with them. You start by taking 2 large limes, and you cut the peel from the limes away with a paring knife, and then you take these limes and you put them in the work bowl with the metal blade, and you want to puree this by processing for 1 minute. Once the limes are pureed, then add 1/3 of a cup of light brown sugar, a 1/4 cup of cider vinegar, and 2 tablespoons of soy sauce, and also 1 cup of water. And we'll process this for just a few more seconds to blend everything well. And then you want to strain all of this into a bowl and secure the metal blade in place from below so that it doesn't fall right out into the strainer. And then we will julienne, put in the julienne disc, the 2mm square julienne, and julienne a turnip, a medium-sized turnip that you've peeled. And this will give us beautiful strips of turnip, and it's very hard, so use firm pressure. And then take a medium-sized carrot and lay 2-inch sections horizontally in the feed tube, and process also with firm pressure. And then that's the lime dipping sauce. You add the carrots and the turnips to the sauce, and at the table, each diner takes an egg roll, helps himself to some of this dipping sauce, and also helping himself to some of these shredded vegetables. You put it on a plate, you dip into the sauce, and you enjoy yourselves. And this makes 14 to 15 egg rolls. So there we have those 3 versatile vegetable dishes, each quickly prepared with a food processor. The stuffed zucchini boats, the baked vegetable strata, and the egg roll with 7 vegetables and lime dipping sauce. I hope you make them, and I hope you enjoy them all. This is Greg Patent wishing you happy cooking and delicious eating.
Cuisinart presents Patently Easy Food Processor Cooking with your host, Greg Patton.
Hi, I'm Greg Patton, and welcome to my kitchen. On today's show, we'll be working with cheese, and I'll be making a savory cheese roll, a delicious cheddar cheese fondue, a fontina gougere, and also a feta cheese souffle, all with a food processor. Cheese rolls are really an American institution, and the one I'm going to make is a little bit special because it uses cottage cheese to substitute for the cream cheese, so we're really lowering the fat content. And it's very, very easy to make. With a metal blade in place, you put 6 ounces of cheddar cheese that you've cut into 1-inch pieces into the work bowl. The cheese can be at room temperature or it could be refrigerated. It really doesn't matter. And then we'll process this by pulsing a few seconds. And then let the motor run for about 30 seconds to puree the cheese. And what you want really is for the cheese to be very, very finely chopped. And then we'll just add the remaining ingredients. 3 ounces of crumbled blue cheese, 6 ounces of cottage cheese, that measures 3/4 of a cup, generous sprinkling of Tabasco sauce, of course, according to taste. And then we'll let this run for about 30 seconds. And where this cheese roll differs from so many cheese rolls is that, first of all, there's no butter. And also, we are cutting back on the fat by using cottage cheese instead of the cream cheese. So you want to let this process until it's very, very smooth. And you should stop to scrape the work bowl as necessary. And as you do that, you will see how smooth the mixture is. And then when it's really smooth, take this sticky-looking mixture that I'm pouring in here. What this is a teaspoon of gelatin that I sprinkled over 1½ teaspoons of water in this little custard cup. Now I set this into a small saucepan with hot water and let this mixture dissolve. And then you let this run for a few seconds. And the reason we're putting the gelatin in here is because there is no butter or really high-fat cheese in here. The gelatin is used to help set the mixture. And that's it. Very, very fast. In order to shape this mixture, you scrape it out of the bowl onto a sheet of plastic wrap that has been either sprayed with a nonstick spray or lightly oiled. And sometimes you have to fight with this just to make sure that it doesn't go all over the place. Now scrape most of this cheese mixture out of the work bowl, then I will show you a little trick to get the work bowl really clean without too much effort. Make sure the blade is firmly seated in the bottom of the work bowl. After you've scraped most of the cheese mixture out, turn the motor on for just about a second or so. The blade is spun clean, and then you can take your plastic scraper and scrape the rest of the mixture out. And all you really need to do from here is to use this plastic as a guide. Roll the cheese up in the plastic. This is a sticky mixture. So just roll it up in the plastic and close it completely. Then you can just pat it into shape. What you want to do is shape this into a roll of about 9 inches long and 2 inches in diameter. And once it's all rolled up like this, then you refrigerate it for about an hour to solidify it. And then you take it out and you roll it in about a ½ cup of chopped walnuts or parsley, depending upon how calorie conscious you are. You let it set in the refrigerator for several hours or overnight, and then you can serve it just as we do on this platter right here. This is the log that has been shaped and refrigerated and rolled in walnuts, and then this is really good to serve with crackers or with bread, and for an appetizer this will serve a good 6 to 8 people. Fondue is the national dish of Switzerland, and the word fondue, F-O-N-D-U-E, means melted. And of course you all know Swiss fondue as having Swiss cheese and maybe some Appenzeller cheese in it. This particular fondue has beer and cheddar cheese. It's made in the food processor, and because it's made in the food processor, it turns out not to be stringy. so it can hold its heat really well, and then you can dip it at your leisure for several minutes and it will not get stringy on you. And that's one of the best reasons for making fondue with the processor. Also, it's extremely quick. To do it, have the metal blade in place, put 1 pound of cheddar cheese that you've cut into cubes in the work bowl, pulse a few times to start the process of chopping. And then you want to let the motor run until the cheese is finely chopped, about 10 seconds or so. And then towards the end of processing, add a tablespoon of cornstarch and a half teaspoon of dry mustard. And process this for a few seconds more. There's also a half teaspoon of sugar in there. And then while this is happening, heat up 1 cup of beer to boiling along with 1 tablespoon of butter. Start the motor and pour the boiling liquid through the feed tube. And you see what this does is it melts the cheese right in the work bowl. And it happens so quickly. And you want to stop after a few seconds, scrape the work bowl well, and then let this process again for a few seconds. And then once the cheese is thoroughly melted and everything is smooth, then all you do is just simply return this mixture to the saucepan, secure the blade in place from below, and there we go. Put this back on the heat. This should be on medium heat. Stir it until it thickens and coats a spoon fairly heavily. And while it's thickening, add about a half teaspoon of Worcestershire sauce and again several squirts of Tabasco. Tabasco and cheese go very, very well together. So just keep cooking and stirring it until it thickens. When the cheese is melted, you see how nice and thick it is and how smooth. Just pour it into a serving bowl. And what I've done is I've put the serving bowl right in the middle of a platter with a number of different vegetables and also some ham cubes. These are just some suggestions as to what might go with this fondue. But if you want to serve it for a group this way, this makes a very festive way of doing things. This is perfect for, say, a light snack late at night or for an informal party. I have some ham cubes around the outside, cherry tomatoes, blanched cauliflower, and also some blanched broccoli flowerets. Just make sure you have enough dipping foods for everybody. Raw mushrooms would also be nice. And also make sure you provide your guests with dipping forks so they can spear the food, dip it into the fondue, and then enjoy it to their heart's content. Serve this with beer or a dry white wine. And this amount of fondue will certainly serve about 4 to 6 people. A gougère is a delicious, cheesy and eggy pastry made with puff shell dough. The original recipe comes from Burgundy in France, and usually Gruyere cheese is put into gougère. I'm going to make it with fontina this time. Fontina cheese actually comes from a couple of different places. There's an Italian fontina, and there's also a Danish or even a Swedish fontina. It comes in a wheel. You buy it in wedges, and the holes are very tiny. It has a very nutty flavor, and it's softer in consistency than either Gruyere or Emmentaler cheese. For this recipe, you'll need a 4-ounce wedge of it, and make sure that it is well chilled. Before we get to the fontina, though, we're going to have to start by processing some Parmesan cheese, which we're going to use to decorate the gougère with. So with the metal blade in place, start the motor and drop 1 ounce of Parmesan through the feed tube, and then process this for 45 seconds. After the Parmesan is processed for 45 seconds, it should be finely chopped, so just simply remove it from the work bowl, transfer it to a small bowl, and then add a teaspoon of paprika and just stir the two together to mix up. And then this will be all ready for us to use at the end of the recipe. Then put the medium shredding disc in place, and as I said earlier, make sure that the fontina is very well chilled. Put it in the feed tube, and then use practically no pressure to process since it is such a soft cheese. There. And then empty the work bowl and then reinsert the metal blade, and then we will come back to this a little bit later. In the meantime, you have to get ready 1 cup of water and 1 stick of butter and a half teaspoon of salt. You want to bring this mixture to a boil in a 1-quart saucepan over high heat. Make sure that the butter is thoroughly melted and the mixture is very hot, as you can see here. Then take the pan off the heat, immediately add 1 cup of flour, and then stir this very well with a spoon to make sure that the flour is well incorporated, and then you return the pan to heat. And what we're doing now is we're making the basis for the puff shell dough. Now, puff shell dough is used to make cream puffs and to make gougere, and all puff shell doughs start out this way, with a mixture of butter and water and then flour. The idea is to stir and cook this mixture, and it's now nice and very thick. And you want to make sure that you cook it to drive off excess moisture just until this dough begins to film the bottom of the pan. You can see that it's doing that. You see how it's filming the bottom of the pan right there. Give it a couple of more stirs, and then put it into your food processor work bowl, just like that. And then you want to process this for about 15 seconds. Even though this is a hot mixture, you don't have to worry about damaging the processor work bowl. And this 15 seconds is just to smooth everything out. Then add the shredded fontina, a teaspoon of dry mustard, and a half teaspoon of pepper. Process those for a few seconds. And then add 4 large eggs all at one time. And this is where the processor does such a wonderful job of saving time and elbow grease. We'll process this for 30 seconds. When I used to make puff shell dough, I would have to beat each egg in individually by hand, and then it would take me several minutes for each, and the processor just does it in about 30 seconds. And you want to make sure that the mixture is very smooth. So scrape the work bowl again once or twice, and if you see some egg that isn't mixed up, process again. There. And now you see this is a nice, thick, eggy mixture, and now we're going to be ready to shape the fontina gougere. But before I do that, let me show you the pan that you're going to need. This is a 14 by 17 inch baking sheet that's been lined with parchment paper. You could use aluminum foil if you wanted. Butter that foil or parchment paper, and then take an 8-inch round cake pan, butter the sides only, and then you just plop this cake pan bottom side down right in the middle of the sheet, and then this is going to act as the center of our fontina gougere wreath. A gougere is a wreath. And now what I'm going to do is to transfer this gougere mixture into a pastry bag, and I'll show you how to shape this gougere after it's been put into the pastry bag. You pipe continuous loops of this gougere mixture through the pastry bag. I fitted it with a star tip about 1/2 inch diameter. You can see what I'm doing. You try to keep away from the side of that 8-inch pan that's in the middle, although it is buttered, so if it does stick, you don't have to worry about unsticking it. And this way, by shaping the gougere this way, it's going to be very, very pretty. And if you don't have a pastry bag, you can still shape the gougere by using tablespoons. So use large tablespoons and shape about 14 to 16 large mounds of dough touching each other. Then let's see if I'm going to make this right to the edge here. There, that's the last of the gougere batter. Then you bake this in the center of a preheated 400-degree oven for about 30 minutes until it's a rich brown color. You can see how nicely this gougere has risen and puffed and browned, and it is hot, so I'm going to use a couple of mitts to get rid of this cake pan here. And we're not done yet, because we're going to add more flavor and glamour to this gougere. I have a mixture here of 1 tablespoon of Dijon mustard mixed with a tablespoon of dry white wine. You brush this all the way on top of this gougere, and this will give a wonderful, wonderful tang and bite. It's a nice thin coating, and this also is going to act as kind of a glue for the Parmesan paprika mixture that I had prepared earlier, one of the very first things I did for the recipe. So then you sprinkle this Parmesan paprika mixture right over the top as I'm doing. This is giving off a wonderful, wonderful aroma. And then you get this back in the oven for 5 minutes. When the gougere is ready, just look at what you have. You will be so proud of your achievement because you'll have this beautiful, beautiful wreath. It's crusty on the outside and very tender and custard-like, very much like a popover on the inside. And this is very hot, and so what you want to do is just simply slide it off the cookie sheet onto a serving board, let it cool for a few minutes, and then you can cut it into wedges, serve it with drinks, and this gougere will serve generously for as an appetizer for a cocktail party or for a dinner, at least 12 people. The feta cheese souffle I'm going to make has a wonderfully mild flavor, even though it has 4 ounces of feta cheese in it. It is great to serve as a first course at a dinner, or you can also serve it as a main course at lunch along with a green salad and fruit for dessert. You will need to make the souffle a 6-cup souffle pan, and I like to use this glass pan right here. This is an oven-proof glass pan. If you filled it with water right to the top, it would hold 6 cups. Make sure that you butter it thoroughly and then dust it all over with fine, dry breadcrumbs or cracker crumbs. And I find that the crumbs actually help the souffle to rise even more than just buttering the pan alone. So get that ready. Also separate 5 eggs. You will need 4 yolks and 5 whites for the souffle. So get those separated while the eggs are cold and let the whites come to room temperature. And to start the souffle, melt 3 tablespoons of butter over medium heat in a 1 to 1.5 quart saucepan, and then add 3 tablespoons of flour. And mix it all up thoroughly, and I'll tilt this so that you can see what I'm doing. You are making a roux, which is a flour and butter mixture, and the object here really is to cook the flour with the butter until the raw, pasty taste of the flour is gone. So this usually takes a couple of minutes, and the mixture should be very nice and bubbly. Then, off heat, quickly add 1 cup of hot milk, just all at once, and then whisk all of this together, and return the pan to heat. And as I'm whisking, within just a few seconds, you see, this mixture becomes a very, very thick paste. And this is a white sauce at this point, and after it has cooked for about a minute, then we can take it off the heat and add the seasonings: a 1/4 teaspoon of salt, an 1/8 teaspoon of white pepper, and a little bit of freshly grated nutmeg, about equivalent of 1/8 of a teaspoon. Whisk all of these things together. And then, in order to prevent a skin from forming on the sauce, take a piece of wax paper that you've lightly buttered and put it buttered side down right on the sauce, and it'll look just like that. You can just let it sit here at room temperature until you're ready for it. This sauce base should be warm when you next get to it. So I'm just going to leave this alone for now. And then I'm going to move over here to the processor with the whisk attachment in place. And the egg whites, 5 of them, are at room temperature. This is a standard size work bowl. Make sure it is very clean and dry, free of grease, and start the motor. And we'll whisk the whites. And at first you'll notice that the whites start to become frothy, and within about 30 seconds or so they begin to mount up. In another 30 seconds or so they become a nice opaque white and have increased in volume by 2 or 3-fold. And in yet another 30 seconds or so, they will become very opaque. The beaters will leave streaks in the whites. And there, that should do it. When the whites are done, just remove the whisk attachment and then test with a rubber spatula or plastic scraper. Look at that. You see it holds a nice peak when you lift it up, and the whites are stiff but not dry, which is what you want. And then you want to transfer these whites now to another bowl. Feta cheese is a salty Greek cheese that isn't only made in Greece, it's also made in Denmark and the United States now. You can buy it at the supermarket. It usually comes packed in brine. It's fairly firm, but when you pick at it like I'm doing right now, you can see that it is also fairly crumbly. Feta varies in saltiness, so I would taste various brands and then select one that you like the best. For this recipe, you'll need 4 ounces of feta, and with a metal blade in place, it's not necessary to clean the work bowl after the whites have been removed. Just crumble the feta right into the work bowl and add the yolks, 4 egg yolks, and then you'll want to process this until the feta and the yolks are smooth. So be sure that you stop the motor every so often to scrape the work bowl. These yolks are really very, very golden. It gives a beautiful color, and it will give a beautiful color to the souffle after it's baked. Make sure that you, whenever you're processing fairly thick mixtures, such as this feta and the yolk mixture, that you really stop to scrape the work bowl as necessary. And it's really hard for me to give you a guideline other than just to pay attention to what's going on in the work bowl, and you'll know that you've processed enough when the mixture looks very, very smooth. And it should only take you probably about 1 to 2 minutes of processing total. While that's going on, I'm going to go back to this sauce mixture. I've taken the wax paper off, and you see it's still warm, and it's very, very thick. Give it just a quick whisk. Just to make sure it's all smooth. And that now that this feta yolk mixture is all smooth, then I'm going to take this very thick, pasty roux and scrape it out of the work bowl and do a thorough job on this. And now we'll want to incorporate this into the souffle base along with a tablespoon of freeze-dried chives or 2 tablespoons of fresh chives. And let's just process this for about 3 seconds because we don't want to overdo it. And if we do overdo it, then it becomes very gluey because of the cooked roux. Then put your egg whites right on top. And then pulse once or twice. And you see how thoroughly that gets incorporated. Scrape around the side of the work bowl thoroughly to go all the way around. And then give 1 very quick pulse, just like that. The idea, of course, now is not to process out all of the air that you've whipped into the whites. Then, holding the blade in place from below, turn this souffle mixture into the prepared pan. And in the meantime, what you should do is adjust an oven rack to the lower 3rd position and preheat your oven to 400 degrees. And then after the souffle mixture is in its pan, immediately place it in the oven and decrease the thermostat to 375 degrees. And you bake the souffle until it is puffed and golden brown, about 35 to 40 minutes. The center should still be slightly soft, and be sure you serve it at once. So have fun working with cheese with your food processor. This is Greg Patton wishing you happy cooking and delicious eating.
Cuisinart presents Patently Easy Food Processor Cooking with your host, Greg Patent.
Hi, I'm Greg Patent, and welcome to my kitchen. On today's show, I'll be doing food processor pasta, including a basic recipe that you make right in your machine with the machine kneading the dough. Also a recipe where you can use the food processor pasta attachment. And I'll also be making an Italian meat sauce with beef, chicken, and ham, and an Oriental dish, a cold one, spicy noodles with chicken. If you've never made your own homemade pasta, you have a real treat coming to you because the food processor does such a super job of making it. I'm going to do it two ways. Once where the machine kneads the dough, and the other way with the food processor attachment for pasta, making the dough. With the metal blade in place, put 2 cups of flour and 3/4 of a teaspoon of salt, and of course you can leave the salt out if you wish, a tablespoon of water, and a tablespoon of oil right into the work bowl. And then you start the motor and add through the feed tube 3 large eggs. And within about 15 seconds or so, the mixture in the work bowl should almost be gathering into a ball. And if it doesn't gather into a ball, don't worry about it, because you can always adjust the consistency with a little bit more water, just a few drops at a time. And you want this to almost gather into a ball, but not necessarily quite. You want some pieces of dough, as you can see here, moving around the work bowl, and you don't want this pasta to be moving freely at this point. Basically, what you want to do up to now is just to adjust the moisture content. Take the metal blade out and then turn this mixture out onto a sheet of wax paper. And then I'll show you what you do with it then. You see, we haven't really done any kneading up to this point. The metal blade goes back in. Squeeze this mixture together with your hands, and it should feel nice and moist. What I want to do is to squeeze this and then stick my finger right into the middle of it, as I'm doing now. And then as I pull my finger out, you see, nothing is sticking to the finger. This should be a dry hole, so to speak. Then you cut this pasta mixture up into walnut-sized pieces, because the real effort of the machine now is going to come into play, and we're going to use processor power to actually knead this dough. If you were doing this by hand, you would have to squeeze this dough between your hands or on a board for about 15 minutes to develop the gluten. And we're going to have the processor do it in about less than a minute. So with the metal blade in place and the motor on, drop these walnut-sized pieces through the feed tube, just one right after the other. And now you want this dough to form a ball. And so you wait a few seconds, and if it doesn't form a ball, then add a little bit of water. And then once it forms a ball, you want this to knead. See, it's forming a ball right now with just a few stray pieces. Then you want to let this knead for 1 full minute. After the dough has kneaded for 1 minute, then remove it from the work bowl, being careful of the metal blade, and always use a plastic scraper and not your fingers to clean the blade. And then we'll press this together. The dough feels warm. It's very elastic. It's very smooth, and you see it's not sticking at all to my hands. Now, just let me leave this here for 1 minute. And then here I have some dough that I made earlier. And I want you to see how supple. You see how very stretchy this is? Okay, this has sat for at least 30 minutes, and that's exactly what you want to happen. Whereas this freshly made dough, you see, when I try to stretch it, it's very, very tough, and it starts to tear. So just compare these two. This very supple dough that's been sitting here for at least 30 minutes, and then this freshly made dough. And the difference is just absolutely amazing. Be sure that you let the dough become really supple and smooth before you start to work with it. So I'm going to get both of these doughs just out of the way, wrap them in plastic wrap, and let them sit at room temperature until you're ready to work with them. And then you have a choice of either rolling the dough out by hand or using a hand crank pasta maker. And so if you're going to use the hand crank pasta maker, divide the dough into 8 pieces, lightly dust it with flour, and then adjust the setting to the widest setting, and then crank the dough through. And then decrease the setting 1 notch or 2 notches and crank it through again. And what you keep doing is simply decreasing the thickness of the dough each time. And here's a strip that has passed through several times, and I'm going to pass it through now for its last time. And so from one little piece of dough, you see, you have a nice long strip of pasta just like that. And then you can, of course, cut this in half if you don't want your pasta to be very long. I also have a strip here of spinach pasta, and I'll tell you how to make that in just a minute. Once you've cranked the dough out to its proper thickness, then you adjust the pasta maker to cut the dough for you into strips. And so you coax this in. You see what's happening here? This is getting cut into little linguine. And this spinach pasta is made the same way as the basic pasta, except I used 1 cup of spinach and 2 cups of flour and no water. I'm going to do fettuccine right now. And 2 eggs, because spinach has a lot of moisture. So this is how it goes, and I'm going to just leave it right there. Now, this is a lot of fun, but I think what's even more fun and what saves you even more time is to make pasta with a food processor attachment. And to do that, you put 3 cups of flour in the work bowl with a metal blade. And I should point out to you that not all food processor manufacturers and not all manufacturers of one model food processor make pasta attachments for all their machines. So you should check to see what is available for your particular machine. Put 3 cups of flour, a teaspoon of salt, and 4 eggs in the work bowl, and turn the motor on. And you want to let this run for about 15 seconds. And unlike the dough that I just made, this method of making pasta will not give you a dough. You will get a granular mixture. And you do not want a dough to form. You want these granules to form instead. You let this process for about 30 seconds total. And if the mixture looks too dry, you just add a little bit of water through the feed tube, about a teaspoon or so at a time, making sure that this mixture does not gather into a dough. It gathers into a mixture that looks something like coarse cornmeal. And when you pinch it together between your fingers like that, it holds. So that tells you that this is moist enough. So to make pasta with the pasta maker, you just put your pasta attachment on. And this is so much fun. And you take the granules and you scoop the granules out into the hopper. And most pasta makers will give you a choice of attachments to use. And since I'm using the machine, and since I have the option of making something other than fettuccine linguine, I'm going to be doing some macaroni. So you just push this granular mixture down through the chute, and then you use the tool that's provided for the machine to push the granules down. And you see, you have granules instead of a dough because this is an extrusion apparatus. There they come. And so there's no kneading. The kneading is actually done as the macaroni comes out, or whatever kind of pasta you happen to be making. I just want to do a little sampling for you, because just to show you how much fun this is, and also how fast it is to make something like macaroni in your own kitchen. There. So that's how you make pasta with a food processor, whether you choose to have the machine knead the dough for you and then roll the dough out by hand, or a hand crank machine, or you choose to use the pasta maker. A traditional bolognese sauce has meat and tomatoes that are cooked together for a long, long time. My bolognese sauce probably shouldn't even be called bolognese because it's very untraditional. It has beef, chicken, and ham, and very finely chopped vegetables, and also tomatoes. To start making it, you have the metal blade in place, turn the motor on, and then drop a clove of garlic through the feed tube. Follow that with a small onion that you've cut into quarters. This is the easiest way I know of to mince vegetables. Use the pusher to help the vegetables through. A small carrot weighing 2 ounces that you've cut into 3 pieces. And then a celery stalk weighing about 2 ounces that you've cut into 1-inch chunks. And you just drop these vegetables one right after the other through the feed tube, and then you just keep processing until you hear no more chopping sounds. There. And that way you will know that your vegetables are finely minced, which is exactly what you want. I used to do this sauce years ago without the food processor, and now I only do it with the processor because with these finely chopped vegetables, it will take a long, long time to achieve this texture with just a knife. So you scrape all of these vegetables then out of the work bowl into a large skillet or saucepan. This happens to be a 12-inch skillet. And you cook the vegetables in 2 tablespoons of butter. First stir everything around so that the vegetables are coated with the butter. Cook this over a medium heat, and then cover the skillet and let it cook for about 10 minutes or so, stirring occasionally until the vegetables are tender. Then with the metal blade in place, add 2 ounces of ham that you've cut into 1-inch chunks, and this can be smoked ham or it can just be boiled ham, either leftover or something special that you bought. And then you pulse this about 5 or 6 times. Just until the ham is finely chopped. And if there's a chunk that I see didn't get chopped, so we just keep pulsing once or twice more. And then, after the vegetables have cooked for the 10 minutes, you empty the ham into the skillet. And then stir it well. Make sure that you stir everything together well. Cover the skillet and let things keep cooking for another few minutes. And this is a very, very pretty mixture already, and it is also smelling quite good right now. So, while the vegetables and ham cook, reinsert the metal blade. Have ready a ½ pound of round steak or chuck, fully trimmed so that there's no fat or gristle. And this should be weighed after trimming. Put the beef into the work bowl and put a ½ pound of chicken breast. This is skinless and boneless chicken breast that you've cut into about 1-inch pieces. And the meat should be well chilled. And I found that if the meat is well chilled, you'll get a very good chop. And to chop the meat, pulse about 10 to 15 times. And you should stop to scrape the work bowl after every few pulses just to make sure that all the meat is really being treated equally. This is the same technique you would use if you were going to make chopped hamburger or meatloaf. So any kind of meat chopping maneuver, this is the technique. And you want this meat to be finely chopped. So as you look through the top of the machine, just check the consistency of the meat. And that looks just fine. You want tiny, tiny pieces. Then you should increase the heat to medium-high and add this chopped beef and chicken to the skillet. And then you want to stir and cook this over this medium-high heat, tossing fairly frequently just until the beef and chicken lose their pink color. Boy, this is really smelling good right now. When the meat has lost its pink color, increase the heat to high. Add 1 cup of dry white wine or dry white imported French vermouth, 1/4 teaspoon of nutmeg, 1/8 teaspoon of pepper, and a teaspoon of salt. Stir everything together well. Bring the mixture to the boil, and then you'll want to cook it over high heat for about 5 to 10 minutes until the wine is almost completely absorbed by the meat and vegetables. When the wine's absorbed, then add 3 tablespoons of tomato paste. Stir the mixture together and remove the pan from heat just momentarily. And then go back to the processor, put the metal blade in place, and add one pound can of Italian plum tomatoes in their juice. Pulse 4 times. And this just chops the tomatoes coarsely. And then return the pan to heat and secure the blade in place from below with a finger. And then you add these tomatoes right to the meat mixture. Then I'm going to go right back to the processor with the metal blade in place, add a second can of tomatoes to the work bowl, pulse again 4 times, and then I'm going to add these tomatoes to the sauce just a little bit later. I have found that if you add about half the tomatoes at a time to the sauce, and you let each addition thicken the sauce slightly, that you get a fresher tasting sauce than if you add all of the tomatoes at one time. So that's why I'm doing it in 2 additions. Stir everything well. Let it cook over medium-high heat for about 5 to 10 minutes until the mixture is slightly thickened. I'm just going to pretend that that has happened. Add the second can of tomatoes and also a teaspoon or 2 of sugar. You'll have to start with one and then see if it needs the other. Stir very well, and then let the mixture simmer until it is slightly thickened and has reduced to about 6 cups. And I have a batch of sauce sitting right next to this batch for comparison, so you can see that this is kind of liquidy and this is nice and thick. And then you should taste to make sure that it is seasoned to your liking. You can make this way ahead of time. It improves on standing. You can make it ahead and freeze it. It'll make enough for about 6 servings, and this is particularly attractive served with spinach pasta. Cold sesame chicken is a spicy dish with a lot of garlic. It's kind of a sweet, sour flavor. You should make it several hours ahead to allow flavors to blend, and I want to show you right now how you prepare the chicken for the dish. Take some boneless chicken breasts. You will need a ½ pound of boneless and skinless chicken breasts, which means about 2 half breasts. Lay the breast former skin side down on a sheet of plastic, and then fold the ends over towards the middle, just as I'm doing here. And then you use this plastic wrap to aid you to roll this breast into a cylinder, a very compact cylinder. And then you can stick the cylinder into the freezer until the breast is totally solidly frozen. Then bring it back partially to room temperature until it's partially frozen. I'm going to drop this on the counter so you can hear that this is indeed still frozen, but it feels firm to your fingers and it will pass the knife test. So watch as I put this knife right through the chicken breast, and it goes through with just a little bit of resistance. So you need a ½ pound of these breasts. I have 2 of them here, and make sure that the breast passes the knife test. That way it'll be perfect for slicing with the 3 or 4 millimeter slicing disc. There, a little bit of effort. Then, with the slicing disc in place, load the breast pieces into the feed tube vertically so that they will stay upright, and then process with firm pressure. There. And you see how beautifully they slice. They all go in, and then they all come out just perfectly sliced. Then, with paper towels, quickly wipe the inside of your work bowl. And then once the work bowl is wiped, you're ready to proceed with processing the scallions. So put the same slicing disc in place. Load a bunch of scallions. This is about 6 scallions weighing 4 ounces. I'm leaving this rubber band around them to keep them vertical. And process with a medium pressure. And don't be concerned about the rubber band, because in this case it got stuck in the feed tube. It did not go through. So you don't have to take the rubber band off. Transfer the scallions to a bowl, and then we will attend to the scallions much later. If you are going to be making this way ahead of time, such as a day ahead of time, I would recommend that you wrap the scallions up and refrigerate them so that they don't dry out. Then have ready a quart of boiling water. Add these chicken slices directly to this boiling water and stir them and cook them for just about a minute until the chicken is just opaque, which means that it's just cooked through. While the chicken's cooking, let me tell you how to cook the pasta. You will need 12 ounces of fresh pasta, cut about 1/8 of an inch thick. Drop the pasta into boiling water. Cook it. If it's really fresh pasta, it'll take about a minute to cook. And drop it into boiling water and then drain it thoroughly after it's cooked until it feels al dente, which means slightly firm to the bite. And then you plunge it into a bowl of cold water so that it's cooled thoroughly. And then after it's thoroughly cooled, you drain it again and you put it into a plastic bag or a bowl and mix it up with 1 tablespoon of sesame oil. And then that way the pasta can be made way ahead of time, and then you can refrigerate it until you're ready to use it in the dish. So here's the chicken. Let me go get the pasta. I'm going to add the pasta directly to this chicken. And then just stir everything together just briefly. And then get this out of the way while I make that spicy sauce that I was telling you about. With a metal blade in place, start the motor and drop in 3 large cloves of garlic. This is one of those dishes where if you're serving it to company, this is a perfect company dish. You want to make sure that all of you eats it so that you can stand to be around one another. So 3 large cloves of garlic go in just until they're finely minced, which means you can no longer hear any chopping sounds. A 1/2 cup of tahini, and this tahini looks like peanut butter. What it is sesame butter. It's sesame paste made from roasted sesame seeds that are ground. You can get them in supermarkets and also in health food stores. 1/2 cup of chicken stock, a tablespoon of sugar, a tablespoon of sesame oil. Remember, you mix 1 tablespoon of sesame oil with the pasta, and here's another tablespoon that goes in. 1/3 cup of soy sauce, and also a 1/3 cup of red wine vinegar. And we'll process this for about 15 seconds. And this is an absolutely wonderful marinade. You can use this as a salad dressing if you wish. It is so good. Then pour this over the pasta and the chicken. And even though this is not a cooked dish, it is smelling just absolutely wonderful. Toss everything together really well, and at this point what you want to do is cover the dish and let it marinate. Let the chicken and the pasta marinate together for about 2 hours at least in the refrigerator, but it can sit for several days. I'm kind of in a hurry, so I'm going to turn this mixture out. If you let this sit in the refrigerator, all of this sauce gets absorbed by the pasta and the chicken. You turn this out onto a large serving platter, and then you have ready 2 tablespoons of toasted sesame seed, and then you take your scallion or green onion, and then you arrange a border around it. Then you can cover this whole thing, let it chill thoroughly, and then bring it out when you're ready to serve. And this will serve 8 to 10 people. So that's how you make pasta with the food processor and those 2 delicious dishes. Bolognese sauce with beef, chicken, and ham, and that oriental spicy dish that's served cold. Cold sesame chicken with noodles. Enjoy them. This is Greg Patent wishing you happy cooking and delicious eating.
Cuisinart presents Patently Easy Food Processor Cooking with your host, Greg Patton.
Hi, I'm Greg Patton, and welcome to my kitchen. On today's show, I'll be using the food processor to make soup, including this classic cream of mushroom soup, a tangy and delicious chilled avocado soup, and this spectacular soup fit for company, turkey broth souffle. Cream of mushroom soup is one of those soups that we all know and love, but make all too seldomly. And one of the main problems with it is that it usually takes too long to slice the mushrooms. Well, with the food processor, slicing mushrooms is a snap, and so we'll be using the machine to do that, and also to give the soup a terrific flavor, we're going to use it to puree the stems. Now, to begin, what you want to do is to take 5 cups of chicken broth, put it into a 3 to 4 quart saucepan, and this broth can be canned or homemade, and then get the broth coming to a simmer by heating it up over medium heat. And while that's heating up, let's get with the garnish, and remember, with the food processor, your object is always to use the work bowl so that you can do a whole recipe from beginning to end without having to clean the thing until everything is done. So we're going to begin with the driest ingredient first, put in a 1/4 cup of parsley leaves, and process for about 20 seconds until it's finely chopped. And then once the parsley is chopped, we'll take it out of the work bowl and set it aside until we're ready to serve the soup. So remember that with food processor cooking, you very often will do the last step first, especially if the last step, meaning garnishing the soup, involves a dry ingredient. Then start the motor and have a 3-ounce onion. This is a small onion. Cut it into a few pieces and then drop it through the feed tube with the motor on. And if a piece of onion sticks, just use the pusher to get it through. And then you process it until you hear no more chopping sounds, and that tells you that the onion is chopped. And then we'll take the metal blade out, scrape the onion into a skillet that has 3 tablespoons of butter heating up over medium heat. And then give this a stir. And then let it cook slowly. And while it's cooking slowly, let me take you over to the mushrooms and show you what you do with those. Now, when you buy mushrooms, you should aim for mushrooms that have their caps tightly closed. Don't buy mushrooms that have the gills exposed, and make sure that the mushrooms feel firm. And then to get them to slice really perfectly with the processor, slice 2 opposite sides of the cap flat, just as I'm doing. And that way, when you put the mushroom in the feed tube, you see it'll stand absolutely straight on the disc, and then when it's processed, you'll get beautiful slices. Save the trimmings, and also separate the stem from the cap, and then we're going to be slicing the caps, and then we're going to be chopping the stems and the trimmings. So, put the metal blade back in place, add these stems and trimmings, and from 1 pound of mushrooms, you'll get quite a bit. And then we'll want to chop these finely, so the best way to do that is to pulse repeatedly. Give about 5 pulses, and then scrape the work bowl. And you can see that at this point, most of the mushrooms are sort of chopped a medium fine. And so we'll give just a few more pulses. And then remove the metal blade, scraping it clean with the plastic scraper. And you see how fast it is to mince mushrooms. And then you just transfer this mushroom, these minced mushrooms, to the skillet with the onion, and then you're going to want to cook these vegetables together, stirring them occasionally until the mushroom pieces and the onions are very tender. And this should take you about 10 minutes. When the mushrooms and onions are tender, then return this mixture to the work bowl with the metal blade in place, and it smells absolutely wonderful. It's the mushrooms that we're going to puree now with the onions that give the soup a really wonderful, rich flavor. And you want to process this for 2 minutes until the mixture is absolutely smooth. after the mixture is really smooth, take the metal blade out and scrape it clean, and then return this mixture to the skillet. And you want this to really be a nice, smooth puree. And then we're going to thicken it even further, because this is not going to be thick enough to give the mushroom soup the consistency that we want. So put the skillet back on heat, add 3 tablespoons of flour, and then stir this in. And what we're doing now is making a mushroom roux. Now, ordinarily a roux is made just with flour and butter, but in this case we have flour, butter, mushrooms, and onions. And we're going to stir this really well. Cook it for about 2 minutes until the flour is cooked and will not have a pasty taste. Once the mixture is cooked for 2 minutes, then ladle in a half cup, or about a half cup, of this hot simmering chicken broth, and then stir it in thoroughly until the mixture is very smooth. And then after that first half cup is in, add another half cup, and then ladle that in. And the whole point of doing this is just so that when we add this back to the chicken stock that's heating in this saucepan here, the mixture is going to be very smooth. When the mixture is smooth, then just pour it into the pan with the remaining stock, and then just give it a stir and let it cook slowly over a medium heat. And this will just make it slightly thickened. It's not going to be a very thick soup. And then I'm going to shift this over to this burner so it'll be closer to the processor. And then let me show you how to do the mushrooms. We'll put the 2mm slicing disc in place. And then you want to get the mushrooms loaded in the feed tube with the flat sides against the disc. So stand the mushrooms up, just as I'm doing it here, wedging them in tightly. And then the tighter you wedge them in without smashing them, the better your slices are going to be. And then as you process them, empty them into a bowl, and then when they're all processed, we'll add them to the soup. Use very light pressure to process the mushrooms. Now, even though this is a standard size food processor, you see that it can easily accommodate 1 pound of mushrooms, and you see how beautiful, just look at how beautiful and perfect these thin slices of mushrooms are. Now, if you're not ready to complete the soup, just wrap the mushrooms up. But if you are ready to complete the soup, then add these mushrooms to that delicious broth and stir and cook for about 2 minutes, just until the mushrooms are heated through, because we want the mushrooms to have some texture. And then to turn this into a cream of mushroom soup, you add a cup of heavy cream, a few squirts of Tabasco according to taste, 3 or 4 drops should do it, a tablespoon of dry sherry, and salt to taste. Now, I made homemade chicken broth, and so I know this will take about a teaspoon of salt. If you use canned chicken broth, you may not have to add any salt, so make sure that you taste it first. And at this point, all you want to do is just bring everything to the simmer, and then you serve it in bowls, sprinkled with a little bit of parsley, and this recipe will make from about 6 to 8 servings. Cold soups are usually thought of as hot weather food, but the chilled avocado soup I'm about to make is really good any time of the year. It's tangy and it's spicy. And to begin, you turn the motor of your food processor on with the metal blade in place and drop 2 medium shallots through the feed tube, and then a jalapeno chili, which you have cut in half and removed the seeds. And you just let this run for about 10 seconds until you hear no more chopping sounds, and that tells you that the food is processed. And then you should have ready 1 medium-sized cucumber weighing about 10 ounces that you've peeled, seeded, and cut into chunks. And then we're going to add half of these cucumber pieces to the work bowl. You'll need 1 pound of tomatoes that you cut in half, and add half of those to the work bowl. Usually I find that it takes 3 or 4 tomatoes to make a pound. And then 2 medium to large size avocados, also weighing a pound total, and cut those into chunks, peel them, remove the pit, add half of those to the work bowl, and then take 2 ounces of spinach leaves, and 2 ounces of spinach leaves amounts to about 1 cup of very tightly packed. And then we'll want to process this for about 30 seconds. And I'm not going to stir anything. I'm going to wait and see how things progress in the work bowl. This is a standard size food processor, and every so often you may find that you need to stop to scrape, and just to make sure that the food that you've added really is going to get pureed. So push those spinach leaves down into the work bowl. Let this run for a few more seconds. There, the spinach leaves finally get gobbled up. And then now there's enough room in this work bowl, you see, so that I can add all of these remaining vegetables. The last of the cucumbers, tomatoes, avocados, and spinach. This is a very, very pretty and also healthful soup. And then we'll want to process this for about 2 minutes until the entire mixture is thoroughly pureed. Once the mixture is thoroughly pureed, then we're going to add some seasoning to it. I'm adding a half teaspoon of salt, a quarter teaspoon of cumin, an eighth of a teaspoon of freshly ground black pepper, and a teaspoon of sugar. And then 2 tablespoons of lemon juice, and also for a little bit more tang, a tablespoon of red wine vinegar. And then we'll process this for about 15 seconds. And then we'll transfer this mixture to a large bowl. The easiest way to do that is to secure the blade in place from below, and then you can just pour. It's a beautiful, beautiful color. It's also a delicious soup. Then reassemble the work bowl, leaving the metal blade in place. And I don't care if I haven't cleaned everything out of the work bowl yet, because more is going to go into it. Add a cup of yogurt. And this should be just plain, unflavored yogurt. And 3/4 of a cup of half and half light cream or milk, depending upon how rich you want to make the soup. And then we'll process this a few seconds. And you see that helps to clean the work bowl out even further. And then again, securing the blade in place from below, we add this mixture to the mixing bowl. And then for additional liquid, I'm adding 1 1/4 cups of chicken stock, but you can use vegetable broth if you wish. And you just stir everything together and mix it up really well. And once it's thoroughly mixed, then you cover and refrigerate it and chill it for at least 2 hours. But this will keep in your refrigerator for at least 1 or 2 days. And then be sure that you taste it before serving. And just before serving, you can prepare the garnishes, which I'm going to do next. For the garnish, you'll need ½ cup of parsley, 3 large scallions cut into 3-inch sections, a large tomato that you've destemmed, and also a large avocado that you've peeled and pitted. And you want to start out by using the metal blade to process the parsley for about 20 seconds or so until it is finely chopped. And always remember, when you process parsley, to get the best results, you should pat the parsley leaves dry, the work bowl should be dry, and also the metal blade should be dry. And that way you will have no problems. And after the parsley is processed, we're going to just simply remove it, put it back out in the bowl from which I took it. And then for the scallions, I'm going to use the 2mm slicing disc. That's the thin slicer. And wedge the scallions upright in the feed tube so that we will get actual slices of scallion. And then we will process with light to medium pressure. And now the parsley and scallions you can certainly do ahead of time, and then get those all ready to serve with the soup. And then for the tomato, what I like to do is to use the French fry disc. So I'm switching over to the French fry disc. Get that in place, and then put the whole tomato right in the feed tube in any orientation and use light pressure to process. And then you'll have some skin left on top, which you can then just dispose of. And then, as you will see here, the tomato comes out in just beautiful strips that make just a lovely garnish. And then we can use the same disc also on the avocado. So take the avocado halves and then cut them in half again. Wedge them into the feed tube and use very light pressure on the avocado. And then let me just put the avocado in this bowl here. And you can see there's also strips of avocado that you can use. If you'd rather, you can use the 4mm slicing disc and get slices of avocado. So I will show you how to do avocado 2 ways for a garnish. You can just have fun with your machines, deciding what you like best. Wedge the avocado in. I think what I'm going to do is cut this in half so it'll stand up properly. And then use very light pressure. And there, I will add this to this bowl here, and you can see now you have slices of avocado that you can use to garnish your soup. So once you've got your garnishes done, let me show you how you serve the soup. Make sure the soup is really well chilled. Taste it, adjust the seasoning if necessary with a little bit more salt and lemon juice. Cold tends to dull flavors. So after you've ladled the soup in, you see it's nice and thick. If you want it thinner, you can thin it with a little bit more chicken stock. Put a spoonful of tomato strips right in the middle like that. And you can take a spoonful of little avocado strips, you see. And then you pass the scallions separately along with some tortilla chips. And then you can just put a few little parsley sprinkles right next to the tomato and the avocado. And this wonderful soup will make from about 6 to 8 servings. Turkey broth soup is a marvelous soup for a special occasion. It is a cheese souffle baked on top of a delicately flavored broth loaded with little tiny turkey meatballs. You begin by making the meatballs, and to start, you turn the motor on with the metal blade in place and drop 1½ ounces of Parmesan cheese through the feed tube and let this process for about 45 seconds. After 45 seconds, the cheese will be finely chopped, and then we'll add 2 tablespoons of parsley leaves and also 1 slice of bread weighing about 1 ounce that you've torn into pieces, and we'll process this for about 15 seconds. Now, the original recipe comes from Sicily, and it calls for veal. But I found that turkey is the great imposter, and I find it a marvelous substitute for veal. So what I have here is a pound of turkey breast going into a standard size work bowl of the food processor. You trim all the fat and gristle and skin away, cut the meat into 1-inch pieces, add 1 large egg, and about a teaspoon of salt. And again, if you're on a salt-free diet, leave it out. A generous grinding of pepper, and then we'll pulse this about 10 times just to chop the meat and to combine everything well. And that's just about all there is to it. This same procedure you can also use whenever you want to make sausage or pate mixtures or meatloaf mixtures. It's that quick to do it with the processor. And then over here, I have a ready-made batch of little turkey meatballs. You want to heat up 4 cups of turkey stock or chicken broth, bring it to the simmer, and then add these meatballs to it. They should cook slowly at a slow simmer for about 5 to 10 minutes until they're done. And then while these meatballs are cooking, then you can get ready to set up the ingredients that you're going to need to make the souffle top. With the whisk attachment of your food processor in place add 4 large egg whites at room temperature to the work bowl, and then we're going to have our processor whip these whites for us until the whites are stiff but not dry. And make sure that the work bowl is clean and that the beaters of your whisk attachment are clean. And it's just so much fun watching this thing go around and around and around, because now I can have the processor whip whites to new fluffy heights, which I couldn't do before. Let this run for about a minute to a minute and a half until the whites form a stiff peak but are not dry, and then remove them from the work bowl. Once the egg whites are out of the work bowl, it is not necessary to clean the work bowl. Just put the metal blade right back in place, start the motor, and drop 2 ounces of Gruyere cheese that you've cut into 3 or 4 pieces through the feed tube, and let it process for about 30 seconds. This is really the easiest way to process small pieces of cheese that are hard or medium hard. And then once the Gruyere is ready, then we add everything else for the souffle top. 4 egg yolks, and a generous grinding of black pepper, and about a ½ teaspoon of salt, and also 1 cup of ricotta cheese. So you see, this is a pretty hefty souffle base. It's very, very delicious. Process for a few seconds, just to combine everything. And then now we add the egg whites that we whipped with the whisk attachment. Just pour those right on top. And then we'll pulse very quickly. This is very important. We don't want to deflate the air. So about 4 quick pulses, just like that, and now we have this rich, thick souffle top ready. Now, we have the meatballs here that have been simmering in this broth for just about 5 minutes, and now you want to turn all of this into an 8-cup souffle dish. Make sure this is an oven-proof souffle dish. And then the next step, see the meatballs come just about right up to the top of the broth level. And then the next step is just to take this turkey souffle mixture and just quickly ladle it over the top. And then have your oven preheated to 350 degrees. And then you put this turkey broth souffle soup right into the oven. Bake for about 20 minutes until the souffle is puffed and browned, and then you should serve it just as soon as you can. So there you have those 3 terrific food processor soups. The cream of mushroom soup, given added richness and thickness from having the stems minced and then cooked separately and then added to the broth. The chilled avocado soup, tangy because of the yogurt, lemon juice, and vinegar. And finally, that spectacular turkey broth soup with little turkey meatballs hiding underneath the rich souffle base of ricotta cheese, egg yolks, and Gruyere cheese. This is Greg Patent wishing you happy cooking and delicious eating.
Aid was ready.
The big change, complete restyling. The big change.
I think the thing that surprised us was how quickly it came. How quickly we got to the critical mass where advertisers were interested in going in and spending substantial sums of money.
And you flip, yes sirree, about the big change in RCA Victor television history. The big change. The big change.
By 1954, 55, people no longer talked about radio. The old days, the old programs were either transferred to television by that time, like Amos and Andy, Fred Allen, and so forth, or they were gone altogether.
I think really, ladies and gentlemen, television is going to be the undoing of radio eventually, because I'll tell you why. In the old days, an actor in the radio could go up to an empty radio studio, do a terrible program, and go home without worrying. Nobody knew what he looked like. But with television, if you do a bad program, everybody can see you, and somebody, sure as fate as you're walking home, is going to get you and beat your brains out on the way home. But that's all we have time for.
That's right, sir.
We're going to have the same trouble in television I had in radio.
That's right. They cut you all the time. We'll be back in just a moment.
When people speak of the golden age of radio, they're speaking of the shortest golden age in history. Its golden years perhaps covered a decade, little more than that, maybe 15 years. And it was cut short by the release of television.
Tonight, you are enjoying the miracle of radio. Radio at its finest over frequency modulation.
But Howard Armstrong was still stubbornly determined to stick with FM. Meanwhile, the Federal Communications Commission had declared that all sound for television would be carried over FM, which meant millions in royalties for Armstrong. But RCA refused to pay royalties, encouraged other manufacturers not to pay them either, and developed circuits which it claimed were different. And in an attempt to put Armstrong out of business once and for all, Sarnoff successfully lobbied the FCC to change FM's frequency, making obsolete every one of the radios Armstrong had licensed. Armstrong fought back as best he could, launching a series of suits against RCA and other giant corporations as well, whose big profits were built on his inventions. He charged infringements of his patents in violation of the antitrust laws.
This went on for many, many years, and it was a repetitive type of battle. He'd prove it and then have to prove it over again and over again. And the lawsuits and the dollars and the time just must have done something.
He knew what he was up against. They will stall this thing until I'm dead or broke, he said, after paying his first $1 million in legal fees. Royalty income dwindled. His patents were expiring. His health deteriorated. But he could not help himself.
It's a kind of an irony that those qualities that resulted in his great accomplishments in radio, the ability to go through a brick wall on radio theory, were the very qualities which broke him down.
By 1953, Armstrong had spent another $1 million fighting his case. His attorney predicted that he would win in the end, but it would take another 9 years. That Thanksgiving, all the intensity and frustration of Armstrong's obsessive battle with RCA suddenly exploded in a great rage upon his wife. Armstrong swung with a fire poker. The blow landed on Marion's right arm. In a panic, she fled. Their marriage was over.
Armstrong kept driving himself, kept getting more and more in debt. He had at one time been the largest shareholder of RCA. He'd sold most of his stock, and he was fighting this giant corporation with all the resources that it had. He had been a man of enormous drive, tension, and he'd driven himself to the breaking point and it finally snapped.
Sunday, January 31st, 1954, marked the 40th anniversary of Howard Armstrong's demonstration of his first great invention, the regenerative circuit, to the chief inspector of the old Marconi Company, David Sarnoff. In other years, they had marked the anniversary of their friendship with a telegram or letter. Fix your gaze and energies on the next 20 years, Sarnoff had told Armstrong on the 20th anniversary in 1934, so that the telegrams and letters they would exchange at the end of the next generation would make them feel still young, even then. The 20 years had passed. They were enemies now, and Armstrong had been defeated. In his bedroom that evening, he wrote a letter to Marion, filled with regret for the way their lives had turned out. God keep you, he added at the end, and may the Lord have mercy on my soul. Edwin Howard Armstrong had always loved high places. The 125-foot tower behind his house in Yonkers, the New Jersey Palisades he climbed as a youth, the WJZ Tower, with its great strap iron ball 400 feet above 42nd Street, and his own FM tower across the Hudson in New Jersey. Now he removed the air conditioner from his bedroom window. He put on his hat, scarf, overcoat, and gloves, opened the window, and stepped out, 13 stories above the street. A maintenance man found his body on a third-floor terrace the next morning.
My father called me at work, which was very unusual, and said that my uncle was sick and that my mother needed me and could I please come home. And I went in to tell my roommate that I was going to be leaving early. I would not be going home with her. And she was holding a copy of the afternoon newspaper, which she suddenly put behind her back. And she said, "Oh, yes, I know." And I said, What's the newspaper? Why are you hiding that from me? And she wouldn't give it to me at first. And finally, she let me see it, and there on the first page was the news report of my uncle's suicide. On the ride home, I remember thinking, almost of course, almost really I shouldn't be surprised that this sort of what was going to happen. There really wasn't a happy ending to this story.
He died thinking he was a failure. He didn't seem to understand, as I look at it, that he was more of a success than many of these people that he thought he was fighting against. For example, I would say that 300 years from now, there will be people, students at least, who will read his classic paper on FM and know about his work, and they'll never heard of Sarnoff or DeForest.
I did not kill Armstrong, a stunned David Sarnoff quickly declared, and then led a delegation of mourners from RCA to the funeral. Lee DeForest had no public comment, but in private begged for details about his hated rival's death. "Well, Armstrong is gone and I am alive," he said, "and hope to live for many years more." What a contrast.
Well, now, we've done our best, sir, in 30 minutes to just touch the high spots, Dr. DeForest, merely to hint at the vastness of your gift to the world. We'd have to measure the laughter of every motion picture, the pleasure and education of all television and radio, now and forever, the wages earned by millions in the electronic industry, and all the lives spared in peace and war because of you. That is but a fraction of our debt to you. This is your life, Dr. Lee DeForest. In a moment, a word about your future, sir. Meanwhile, here's exciting news for all you ladies out there.
DeForest wrote a boastful autobiography called Father of Radio and tried to persuade his wife to write one of her own, to be called I Married a Genius. Through friends, he tried to sell his story to Hollywood, lobbied for a Nobel Prize, even hired a public relations man to keep his name in the papers. It didn't work. As a publicity gimmick, his publisher sent him a letter addressed only to the Father of Radio, Hollywood, California. If it was delivered, DeForest was to tell the press of his fame. But the post office returned the envelope marked addressee unknown. In 1957, DeForest suffered a serious heart attack and spent the last years of his life confined to his bed. With his fourth wife at his side, he died quietly in his house in Hollywood on the last day of June, 1961. At the end, he had just $1,250 in the bank.
I think the world should remember Lee DeForest as the one who put the third element in the odd in, the basis of a science that grew out of that, radio. But the work was done by others.
David Sarnoff commissioned a flattering biography of himself, and when its author proved insufficiently worshipful, wrote several admiring passages on his own. He successfully launched color television, set the stage for satellite communications, and predicted that by 1990, every home would have its own nuclear power plant in the basement.
I think as his fame grew and as his success grew, Sarnoff became absolutely obsessed with the idea of establishing his place as a unique American industrial leader in history. And to a degree that I've never seen before, he insisted that everything concerning his life, his public life, be documented.
He built a library dedicated largely to displaying artifacts from his own life, then insisted on passing his company on to his son. Ultimately, RCA would pass into the hands of outsiders. And he basked in the admiration of the rich and powerful.
His kind of vision was always so clear, the kind of spirit that must persevere. Without his talents, I might not be here. That's why the gentleman, he's a champ.
David Sarnoff died in 1971. His funeral was testimony to how far the Russian immigrant had come.
David Sarnoff's life exemplifies the greatest product of the American civilization, the free individual. His life tells us that one man, raised in a nation that reveres the individual, can lift the horizons of all mankind to shape a better world. Such a man was General David Sarnoff.
Howard Armstrong's widow, Marion, took up her husband's cause and won every one of his patent suits, though it took her 15 years to do so. She lived out her life in the home he had bought for her at Rye Beach, New Hampshire, driving out in the Hispano-Suiza in which he had courted her 40 years before. it had no radio.
One of the things that interests me about these three men is when you look at their lives, they live in worlds that are no more. They live in a very different world than what we live in today. And they seemed oblivious to the fact that they were changing the world in which they lived. And that they were changing it in directions that they could not anticipate.
The Battle of Britain is about to begin. Upon this battle depends the survival of Christian civilization.
Yesterday,
upon it depends our own British
December
life,
7th, 1941, a date which will live in infamy.
Deutschland sichern! Men will still say, this was their finest hour.
We interrupt this program to bring you a special news bulletin from CBS World News. A press association has just announced that President Roosevelt is dead. The president died of a cerebral hemorrhage.
Ladies and gentlemen,
a child who was asked whether he preferred radio to television. And he said radio. And the father said, why? And the child answered, because the pictures are better.
presenting Mr. Keene, tracer of lost persons. The Quaker Oats Company, makers of Quaker Puff Wheat and Quaker Puff Rice, the delicious cereal shot from guns. Ladies and gentlemen, once again, we present Mr. Keene, tracer of lost persons.
You know, it's hard to tell just what to talk about over the radio. You know, you folks you talk to.
Today is National Defense Test Day.
Yes, here is radio's richest voice since 1926, the Spartan. Spartan offers you beauty inside and out.
In the National Broadcasting Company will now attempt to present an exclusive shortwave broadcast, bringing you a talk by Martha Gellhorn, who will discuss the American battalion in Spain.
Right and left to the head, a left to the jaw, a right to the head, and Donovan is watching carefully. Lewis measures him, right to the body, a left hook to the jaw, and Schmeling is down.
Henry Aldrich! Coming, Mother?
I'll knock and see what happens.
Somebody, I say, somebody knock.
Yes, I know.
Claghorn's the name, Senator Claghorn,
I
that
know
is.
you're from the South.
When I'm in New York, I'll never go to the Yankee Stadium.
Now, wait a minute.
Yes, you try wheat peas, for wheat is the best food of man. They're crispy and crunchy the whole year.
Yeah. Wait, hold it. Just a minute. It appears the forces of live radio have dropped a viper into the fiddle section.
Let me alone. I'll get it.
All right. Take the exercises once more. Yes, sir.
Play it softly, play it tender. Where can I go to surrender?
It is reported that at 8:50 p.m., a huge flaming object, believed to be a meteorite, fell on a farm in the neighborhood of Grover's Mill, New Jersey, 22 miles from Trenton.
What would you say, Professor Pearson?
What's that?
What would you say? What's the diameter of the...
About 30 yards.
About 30 yards. The metal on the sheath is... Something's happening.
It was like looking over the rim of a volcano in the process of erupting, even though 12 hours after the bomb had been dropped. Nagasaki is a mass of angry flames and smoke now, a blazing area extending at least 10 square miles.
Empire of the Air was underwritten by General Motors on behalf of all its employees worldwide. General Motors, committed to excellence in quality products and television programming.
Major funding for this program has also been provided by a grant from the National Endowment for the Humanities and by the Corporation for Public Broadcasting.
As an additional service of this station, Empire of the Air, The Men Who Made Radio, is available from PBS Home Video. To order by credit card, call 1-800-634-4PBS.
This is